Hey guys, how's it going? So today I want to talk a little bit about motivation. It's something that I've been asked about before a few times. So I'm just going to share my thoughts on it. I did originally have some ideas that I put down before in a previous video talking about the difference between intrinsic and extrinsic motivation. And also I've written a blog post about this before. So I'm going to leave both in the description. But I think I've come up with a bit of a more accurate model of at least how motivation works for me, and comparing my motivation for learning Cantonese and Spanish and kind of contrasting those to try to come up with a model. So initially, and I'm going to split this into 4 stages. So initially in stage 1, I'm going to call this the honeymoon phase. So in the honeymoon phase, you first start off, you're very excited, you're very enthusiastic. Normally, if you're like me, you have some sort of big reason why you want to learn. In the case of Cantonese, I had loads of friends, I played table tennis with people, I wanted to communicate, I wanted to speak to people, I was just listening to more of the music, I was just watching all the dramas, getting into that way. I'm just exposed to the culture in so many different ways. And this is really, really motivating. And this is where my initial excitement comes from. There's that desire. But then as you go, you're kind of discovering more and more bits about the culture as you go, and it kind of reignites the flame. So this is normally for me highest at the very, very start because I'm really super excited. But then throughout when I'm learning, it goes in peaks and troughs. So there are times when I don't care as much, and there are times when I maybe stumble along a new drama and kind of like, oh wow, this is so cool, and then like the excitement goes back up again. So it's very much up and down, at least for this this aspect of it. So I'm going to call that the honeymoon phase, and it's not specifically stage 1, 2, 3, 4 clean cut. It's kind of, you have different aspects of different things coming in at different times. And normally at the very, very start, you need to be really, really motivated because the material you're accessing is going to be, for the most part, very dry. This is when I like to try and blast through a beginner's course. Something like Teach Yourself, Asimil, something like that. But if in the case of Spanish, sometimes you can find something based off story, like I use Spanish Covered, the story, and that's actually really interesting for something aimed at such a low level, so that definitely helps a lot. So then you kind of get going, you get your routine set up, and then you start, and you get the excitement carries on, and your excitement starts to dwindle down and down and down as the days go by. But then something amazing happens, and if you're studying in the right way, then you start to notice your own progress. Even little things at first, and this is like what I think is really important to notice, how far you've actually come. So if I come from understanding 0 words, which it was like with Cantonese, to then a month later, listening to a TV show, I'd be like, wow, I understood like 2 words that scene, or something. Or, you listen to a dialogue that sounded like so fast and sounded like a jumble of words before, and now you can start to pick out all the sounds. Or even you've been through this dialogue and you can understand all of it from this specific book. So all of these things I think have great knock-on effects for motivation, because you see your own progress and it gives you this real sense of accomplishment, this real sense of achievement, and this like, I can do it, go, 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 go. Now, the biggest reason I think if you've never learned a language before, speaking early, it can be beneficial is because for me, the biggest source of motivation and kind of, wow, I'm actually learning something was when I remember I was learning Cantonese at about the 6th month mark, and I held an hour-long conversation on Skype with no English, and I was like, giving me such like adrenaline rush, it was really, really exciting, and it's kind of like all of the hard work comes kind of flooding to you at the same time, and you realise, wow, I can actually do this. This is an amazing thing, and I like to call this the progress feedback loop. So what I mean by that is you get really excited, so you put in some effort, you see your own progress, so you think, wow, that motivates you more, so then you put in even more work, and then you get even more progress, and it can kind of like spiral and spiral and spiral, and this can really be what causes you to get super motivated and turn half an hour of study a day, before you know it, into 3 or 4 hours of study a day. Because you just keep on getting addicted to the progress, and you want to keep on chasing that, and you want to keep going more and more and more. You notice the more work you do, the faster gains you get, so you want to do even more work. But then, after a while, again, this starts to diminish, because if about language learning, like building any skill, then diminishing returns start to kick in. So the progress starts to slow down, motivation drops again, and then sometimes in this time, when the progress motivation's dipping, sometimes you'll notice a cool driver and that'll peak again and stuff like that. But generally, let's say they both drop. Well, from stage 1 and 2, you want to try and build as solid routine as possible, so it's just automatic. You wake up, you study like that. You don't have to think about it. You wake up without thinking, you put your headphones on while you're eating breakfast, you kind of open your book, you don't have to think about it. While you're on the toilet, you automatically get out Anki. You want to build loads and loads of micro habits. And this is what you do in the first 2 stages, stage 1 and stage 2. Because what happens in these times of low motivation, your routine and your habits, if you get them automatic, then they will just keep carrying you forwards almost on autopilot without even really needing motivation at all. So this is what I'm going to call stage 3. And I'm going to call this the routine phase. So in the routine phase, you don't have much motivation, but you just keep going anyway. And depending on the language, your level, your progress, all these things, then you can kind of flip between those first 2 stages as they keep going. And then finally, the last stage, stage 4, and I'm going to call this the content-driven phase. So in the content-driven phase, you are being driven by your desire to understand what you're listening and you're reading to. So if I take, for example, me just gone with Spanish, 2 months ago I was reading a book called Sapiens, and even though about the same time I finished Ollie's, can't remember, it was a book called Leafstorm actually, and it was kind of really hazy, I didn't enjoy it that much, my motivation was kind of low, so I decided to read this book Sapiens, and it was so interesting. I kind of completely forgot the fact I was even reading Spanish at all, and I just wanted to keep going, keep reading, and keep immersing myself in this content. And this is really, really powerful. If you can find stuff that you're interested in, genuinely interested in, that you would enjoy in your native language, that you can then enjoy in your target language. And this is, in my previous video I talked about extrinsic and intrinsic motivation. This is the act of what you're doing in itself is intrinsically enjoyable, it's intrinsically fun, you're curious and you want to learn more. And this is super, super powerful. So, like I said before, that's the outline. Stage 1, honeymoon phase. Stage 2, progress feedback loop. Stage 3, the routine-driven phase. Sorry, stage 3, the routine phase. And stage 4, the content-driven phase. And it's not so much 1, 2, 3, 4. It's very much massive grey areas, back and forwards. And you'll be driven by different amounts of these at different parts of your learning. But I kind of figure, roughly, it starts from 1 and kind of progresses more to motivated by the content. More you go and the later you get into your learning. Now, one thing I did want to quickly mention is why I think something like Spanish, at least in my experience, is easier than something like Cantonese. So I talked about this in my last video about which I think is harder, and there is one thing I did mention, which is listening comprehension and acquiring vocabulary and stuff like that. But motivation is a really important thing, right? So if you're not motivated and you don't put in the time, you won't learn no matter what the language is. And the thing that I think makes Spanish so much easier than something like Cantonese is because those first 3 stages, stage 1, 2, 3, you can blast through, You can get to the stage when you're learning like interesting content before you leave the honeymoon phase, because there's so many cognates, you can read stuff of interest to you almost from day 1 and kind of fight through that. So when you're in the honeymoon phase, kind of leaving that, in something like Spanish, you can kind of jump into interesting content straight away and use the content to motivate you. Whereas in something like Cantonese, I found myself, the honeymoon phase, then getting motivated by my progress, and then kind of going on autopilot, getting motivated by my progress again, watching a cool drama, and then maybe that remotivated me, and then motivated by my progress again. And then it wasn't until after a year at least that I was actually interested a lot in the stuff I was studying. So really there's that big divide between your initial excitement and the content driven learning. So this gap has to be driven by something else, which is what I called stage 3 and routine. So if you're learning an Asian language especially, the best piece of advice I can give is Don't rely on motivation too much. It's very fickle. You want to use the initial excitement to build micro habits, to build routines, to get into the groove of things, and then once you have that, rely on that. Just do the same thing every day, day after day, iterate on it, and let your routine carry you forward. This is my thoughts on motivation. This is a model I came up with just a few weeks ago, having to think about my experience with Cantonese and Spanish, and what motivated me. Obviously it's a work in progress, so anything that you think affects your motivation, leave me a comment below. I'd love to hear what you think. And yeah, so thanks for watching, and I'll see you guys in the next video.